Okay, so when I say the word narcissist, what's the first image that pops into your head? I'm guessing it's pretty specific. But what if I told you that's only half the story? It turns out narcissism is way more complex, and it exists on a spectrum that's often a lot more subtle than you'd think. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll tackle that stereotype we all know so well. Then, we're going to uncover the two very different faces of narcissism. After that, we'll get into the science of what a narcissist might actually look like, how it all plays out online, and finally, wrap up with why understanding this whole spectrum is so important. All right, let's dive right into section 1 and talk about the image that we all have in our heads, the classic textbook narcissist. So just take a second and really think about it. If you had to describe a narcissist, what would you say? What do they look like? What do they sound like? Yeah. Most of us immediately picture this person, right? Someone who's super boastful, kind of arrogant, and just will not stop talking about how great they are. They're the ones who will literally say things like, "I'm the best." They are loud, they are proud, and they make absolutely sure everyone in the room knows it. This is what we call the classic overt narcissist. But that is just one side of the coin. What about the narcissist you don't see coming? This is where we get into the two faces of narcissism. The obvious overt type, and its much sneakier counterpart, the covert narcissist. And this is where things get really fascinating. You see, while the overt narcissist is loud and grandiose, the covert type looks like the total opposite, at least on the surface. They might seem kind of shy, insecure, even self-deprecating. But don't let that fool you. Their goal is exactly the same, to manipulate you and get that sweet attention. They just use victimhood to get it. So how do they get that attention? Well, an overt narcissist will just brag. "Hey, look at my new car. You have to see my amazing vacation photos." They want you to be impressed. A covert narcissist, though, they'll kind of guilt you into giving them attention. They'll say things like, "Nobody ever remembers my birthday. I feel so lonely." And that pulls you in by making you feel sorry for them. See the difference? This same pattern pops up when you look at entitlement. The overt type is just direct. They'll cut in line, they'll take the last slice of pizza, because in their minds, I deserve this. The covert type, again, is way more manipulative. They frame their entitlement as suffering. They'll say things like, "No one ever appreciates how hard I work," which makes you want to give them what they feel they deserve. And their emotional expression, it's another dead giveaway. The overt narcissist is explosive. We're talking loud anger, public put-downs, just pure rage. But the covert narcissist, oh, they are the absolute masters of passive aggression. They'll use the silent treatment, guilt trips, and one of my personal favorites, insults disguised as compliment. For example, a covert narcissist might hit you with something like, "Wow, you look good." For once. It sounds like a compliment, so your first instinct is to say, "Thanks," right before that little sting hits and you realize you've just been insulted. It's a compliment salt, and it's a classic tool designed to leave you feeling confused and questioning yourself. So we've got these two very different psychological profiles. But does narcissism actually have a physical signature? Can you see it? Well, let's get into our third section, a portrait of a narcissist, and see what the science says about their appearance. According to some really interesting research from the Journal of Research in Personality, the answer is, surprisingly, yes. A study set out to answer a pretty simple question. Can you actually spot a narcissist just by looking at a picture of them? And the findings were pretty specific. The study found that certain physical cues were linked to higher narcissism scores. Things like wearing expensive, stylish clothes and having a very neat, organized appearance. For women, more makeup, plucked eyebrows, and showing cleavage were also strong indicators. I mean, it all points to a focus on grabbing attention. But here's a fun one. For men, wearing eyeglasses actually had a negative correlation. So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that our snap judgments about narcissism from just a photo are actually pretty darn accurate. About as accurate as judging extroversion, which is known as the most obvious personality trait. It seems like their deep-seated need for admiration and attention literally shows up in how they present themselves to the world. Okay, let's take all of this and see how it applies to the world we're all living in right now. Section 4, Narcissism in the Digital Age. How does this stuff actually play out online? You know, a narcissist's use of photos online can basically tell the entire story of a relationship cycle. It starts with love bombing, where they'll force themselves into all your pictures to publicly claim you. Then comes devaluation, where suddenly they refuse to be in photos with you, or maybe they'll crop you out. And finally, the discard, where they'll very deliberately post pictures with their new source of supply, all designed to make you feel worthless. And what about the covert type? Oh, online they are masters of the victim photo. They'll intentionally post pictures where they look really sad or thoughtful, sending out these cryptic messages of suffering. And what's the goal? To get a flood of comments asking, what's wrong, so they can feed into their narrative of being a victim.
Okay, all of this focus on appearance and photos, it leads to a huge question, right? Is every single person who posts a ton of selfies a narcissist? And the answer might actually surprise you. A study from 2020 found that despite the stereotype, pathological narcissism is not a significant predictor of how often somebody posts selfies. The science just doesn't back up that common assumption. So if it's not narcissism, what is it? Well, the study points to two other key factors. The first is something called body surveillance, which is this habit of constantly monitoring your own body from an outsider's point of view. And the second is positive expectations. Basically, the belief that posting selfies will get you likes, approval, and positive feedback. So it's really more about body image and seeking social rewards. All right, let's bring all of this home in our final section, why this all matters. It's really about moving from that simple stereotype to a much more useful and nuanced understanding of the spectrum.
So if you take just one thing away today, let it be this. Narcissism is a spectrum. It runs all the way from that loud, grandiose person we all picture to the quiet, manipulative person who's hiding behind a mask of victimhood. Their methods might look totally different, but that underlying need for admiration and the lack of empathy, it's exactly the same.
So how can you actually recognize the impact of this behavior in your own life? Look, it's less about trying to diagnose someone and more about noticing how you feel. After you talk to them, do you feel totally drained or anxious? Do you find yourself constantly second-guessing your own memory, which is a classic sign of gaslighting? Is this person always the victim in every story they tell? And maybe most importantly, does your gut just scream that something is wrong? Recognizing these two faces of narcissism isn't about running around and labeling people. It's about empowering yourself with knowledge. It's about understanding the subtle dynamics that can be so incredibly damaging. So the final question I'll leave you with is, now that you know the signs, what will you see differently?